Hi, welcome to today's training. Today we're going to discuss the upcoming changes to OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard. These changes are often referred to as the Globally Harmonized System, or GHS. It's going to be a new way of classifying and labeling chemicals for the workplace. The Hazard Communication Standard is an OSHA standard that requires employers to help employees understand the safe work practices and hazards that are associated with chemicals that they may have to use in the workplace. The GHS is going to change the way we look at chemicals, how they are classified, how they are labeled, the safety data sheets that are used to provide information about those chemicals, and training changes that will happen as a result of this upgrade. And really that's what this is. This is an upgrade to the hazard communication system. GHS has been designed to improve the quality and consistency of that hazard information. To give you some history, over the years, the global economy has become a huge impact on how we import and export goods, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well. Every country has had their own standard for, communicating hazards with chemicals and how materials should be used in the workplace. And that has become more and more of an issue and a concern for manufacturers and employees and employers who are using those chemicals. So what happened basically was the UN got together and said, hey, let's come up with a standard that everybody can use. Well, they did that, and Europe started using it, and it worked really good. They made a few tweaks, and they now have finally implemented this for the entire United Nations. All 85 or so countries that are members of that organization. And so basically what we have now is a uniform system of how chemical information is going to be distributed down to employers and employees who are using those chemicals. So this is why this is a great thing. It's going to allow a much easier understanding of what's going on. Okay, so that's handling, safe use. All those things are important improvements. So let's talk about the first part of the major changes that are happening with HazCom, and that's the hazard classification. Many of you are familiar with different types of hazard classifications such as flammability or reactivity. Some of those will still apply, but they're going to classify chemicals into really two main categories, health and physical, and then there's an environmental one as well, but we're not going to discuss much of that based on the fact that this is a training topic for the health and safety of employees. So with that said, physical hazards are going to be explosives, flammables, oxidizers, those types of things. Health hazards are going to be toxic types of chemicals, irritants, carcinogens, those types of things. So how are these going to be represented? Well, they're going to be represented through new labels. And the new labels are going to have a series of pictograms and hazard statements for each of the different hazard classes and categories. There will be 9 new pictograms that will be used for labeling chemicals. 4 will be related to health hazards, 5 will be related to physical hazards, and 1 will be related to environmental hazards. Yes, I understand that equals 10, but one of them is used twice, both in the health hazard and the physical hazard category. Okay, so let's look at these pictograms and how they will be represented. The first one is for acute toxicity, severe acute toxicity. What does that mean? Well, an acutely toxic substance is something that causes, major injury or even death pretty quickly. A good example would probably be chlorine gas or cyanide. Those are some examples of chemicals that are acutely toxic and severely acutely toxic. So the skull and crossbones pictogram will be used to represent those type of chemicals. There's also, the next one is a exclamation point. This is also for acute toxicity, but on a less severe standpoint, such as irritants, dermal sensitizers, something that might give you a rash or might cause a little burning sensation in your lungs if you inhale some of it, but it's not going to knock you over and kill you immediately. Maybe long term it could have some severe effects, but the idea is looking at how that affects you in the short term. The next one is for corrosion, skin corrosives to be exact. Anything that would affect the eyes or skin or cause a corrosive state to part of your body is listed into this pictogram. And then the next one is really where we get into those long-term health effects. The guy with the chest, he's got a lot going on there. He is definitely going to feel the pain from any of these below, such as carcinogens, mutagens, any type of reproductively toxic type of chemical. So, and as we all know, carcinogen is what? It's something that causes cancer. A mutagen is also a very dangerous substance, which also causes serious alterations to the body by altering the DNA. Now let's move on to the physical hazards. The first is pretty self-explanatory. It's for explosives. The second, for flammables, also pretty self-explanatory. These are common symbols that you've probably seen before. The next one is corrosive to metals, and this is the one that is repeated. As you can see, maybe it's a little easier to understand that pictogram now. One side, it's corrosive to metals. The other side, it's corrosive to skin. So they use it twice. The next one is gases under pressure. And the last one is an oxidizer. As a reminder, an oxidizer is a substance that basically adds to a reaction. A typical example of how an oxidizer has an effect on another chemical is a flammable chemical. If something catches on fire and you add an oxidizer to it, it increases the strength of that fire. So, oxidizers are important to know. Why? Because you want to keep them separate from flammables when storing those items. And the last pictogram is the environmental hazard pictogram. Basically, it's a fish upside down, tree, water, indicating that there's an effect and it can have a toxic effect on the environment. So as you look at this next slide, as you can see, this label is very common. You've probably seen something like this before, the blue, red, yellow, health hazard, flammability, reactivity. Well, this is what's a big part of the change with GHS. These type of labels will not be used. We will have a brand new labeling system, as I will show you. And this is an example of the new GHS label. So let's walk through the different parts of the label as shown here in this example. First, you're going to have the product identifier. Okay, this has got to be the same as what's written on the SDS. Then you're going to have a signal word over here on this side. This is an important aspect of the new label. There's going to be 3 categories: danger, warning, and nothing at all. So as you compare that to maybe an old labeling system, a 0 would probably equal nothing at all, where a danger would equal a 3 or a 4. So those are the new ways that the GHS labels are going to signify the strength of the hazard or the severity of that hazard. You also have the pictograms. Okay, the ones that apply to that particular chemical will be listed as well. And then there's going to be a hazard statement, such as a highly flammable liquid and vapor. One of the things that they've tried to do with this as well, with the hazard statements, is create those to be consistent. So when a company prints a label, they use that same phrase, highly flammable liquid and vapor, not highly flammable vapor and liquid, a liquid and vapor that's highly flammable, or any other combination of those words. It'll strictly be highly flammable liquid and vapor. Then there are the precautionary statements, such as, what do I do to protect myself? What happens if I spill this? If there's a fire or an emergency, what do I do to manage this chemical? Okay. There could be some supplemental information, such as lot codes or something like that, if that's needed. The supplier identification, which is always important. So here's an example of one that's been produced by a Canadian manufacturer for toluene, and this is a good example of how these labels will look. The next change that we're going to talk about is the safety data sheets. You're probably familiar with MSDSs. Well, now they're just going to be called SDSs. The M is dropping. And they're going to have a 16-section consistent format. So what does that mean? Yes, I know. You're going to have to update all of your MSDSs over the next several years that you have in your organization to the new SDSs. Your manufacturer and your supplier should be able to provide you with those as they become available. So these are the 16 sections. We won't talk much about these individually, but it's important to show that there will be a consistent amount of information. This is going to be a really important change to the system that we currently have in place. If many of you have tried to read an MSDS in the past, it's kind of like reading Greek mythology. You know, you have to really search to find what you're looking for, and even when you do, it's sometimes even difficult to understand. So the idea is, hopefully, with this new format, it'll be a lot easier for someone to look at an SDS and understand how to protect themselves, what they need to do in an emergency, and what's in the chemical. So this is, hopefully a very good thing from that perspective. So all employers need to train their employees by December 1st, 2013. So that is kind of the initial step that has to be taken, and that is what we're doing right now through this training. The reason for this awareness training is mainly because there are companies out there that are already using this system, maybe not here in the United States, or some that are being proactive here in the United States, and they are starting to send out these types of labels and these SDSs with these pictograms on already. So it was important for OSHA to make sure that employees are aware of these changes and the new labels well in advance of the implementation of this program, which, as you can see by this slide, is June 1st, 2016. So yes, I understand that's a couple years away, but the idea is to allow for a gradual change over time so that it doesn't hit employers all at once, hopefully. But by December 1st, 2015, all distributors and all manufacturers have to be producing this chemical or any of their chemicals with the new labeling system. With that said, that covers all the updates that are going to happen with GHS. So new labels, new pictograms, new SDSs, and it's all coming here within the next couple of years. And it really should be a good improvement over what we currently have for our hazard communication information. I just want to touch on a couple reminders for all employees out there. When you're working with chemicals, we need to work safely. A couple of key things that you need to do. Make sure that you use eye and face protection appropriately. Liquid chemicals, especially corrosives, can cause permanent eye damage that you can never get back. Make sure you protect yourself. Safety glasses aren't enough when dealing with those chemicals. Make sure you use goggles. Use proper gloves or any other necessary protection that's required for the chemical that you may be handling. Wash hands after using any chemical as well. It's always important that you take that step. It may seem like common sense, but there have been employees out there before who have gotten sick because they've ingested chemicals that they contaminated their lunch or other food that they were, ingesting, and those chemicals went in with that food because they didn't wash their hands. So make sure you do that. Always remember to keep your safety equipment clean and stored properly, as well as store your chemicals in the right location. Remember, flammables need to go in a flammable cabinet, those type of things. Also, know the location of eye wash stations or emergency showers if you use those type of chemicals and need that type of equipment. Dispose of hazardous chemicals properly, know how to deal with spills, leaks, and how to respond to emergency. Those are all important steps in keeping yourself safe when dealing with chemicals. That concludes our training for today. I appreciate your time, and thank you.